All right, so to give us a general perspective in terms of what to expect with some of these states that have one challenge or the other, what could likely happen? What do we expect? Can the courts do this? And at what time? What kind of limits do they have? Let's head to Abuja. Markwe.
Well, thank you. To join us to discuss some of these issues, providing perspective on them, is Jerry Madaki, who is a professor of law at the Catholic Eastern University of Eastern Africa. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. What do you make? Let's first of all start from what you make of the final list published by INEC, which doesn't have the names of the Rivers of a governorship candidate for the All Progressives Congress in Rivers State, in Zamfara State, and also the controversy making the rounds in Omen State over the PDP governorship candidate.
The Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria is one of the constitutional bodies established under Section 153 of the Constitutions. And the functions of INEC are clearly spelled out in the third schedule of the Constitution. And it's inclusive of registering political parties, regulating the affairs of political parties, and also the power vested in them by an act of the National Assembly, that is the Electoral Act that empowers them specifically under Section 153 of the Electoral Act as amended, for them to issue or develop guidelines to regulate the conduct and manage the electoral process in Nigeria. That being the case, there are clear templates that a person or political party must meet before they can feed candidates to contest election. One of the templates that, according to the INEC guideline, a time frame have been established for all political activities or activities preceding the election, which is for the political parties to conduct their primaries, which either may be direct primary or indirect primary. And at the conclusion of it, there is also a time limit within which political parties must submit the names of their duly nominated candidates to INEC for them to look at it and publish that these are the candidates for the forthcoming election. And if any of the political parties fail to meet the deadline, INEC is legally in good stead not to recognize or to accept the list of nominate candidates of that particular political parties. And I think that is what may have, probably that is what has played out in one or two states.
Now let's really look at the individual states. Let's take a look at Zamfara, for instance, where they have no candidates. I think the primaries are not conducted within the time frame.
Yes.
But the APC maintains that they did conduct their primaries within the time frame. How do you think things are going to proceed in that state?
Now, if you look at the APC scenario or the Zamfara scenario, as the case may be, you will find out that the Electoral Act and even the party guideline, the APC party guideline, party primaries for specific elections must take place in certain designated places. For instance, if it is direct primary, if it is senatorial election, that primary ought to take place at the headquarters of the party. If it's State House of Assembly, it has to be at the constituency headquarters. And times and dates and places have been fixed. And in the case of Zamfara, there's this controversy as to where the primaries were held. And APC, I'm sorry to say, did not help matter, because I think it would appear as if they either factionalized or they were singing in discordant tunes. Whereas the governor maintained that primaries were held as and when due and where it ought to take place. There are also a lot of persons in that state, APC members, who opined that primaries were not held as of when due. And do not forget that INEC has the supervisory role to monitor party primaries to ensure that it is in strict compliance with their guidelines. As a matter of fact, each time INEC monitors this election, they issue 3 reports. One is called the outcome of primary. The other one is a monitor's checklist that INEC will tick. Are there female candidates? Were there female aspirants? Did they use any guideline? ABCD, ABCD. And then another report. So INEC was in good state to know whether primaries took place in Zamfara as and when due and in accordance with the extant laws of the country.
I'm just a little curious. We've always heard that, you know, in some instances, INEC will say we have no roles in the party issues. I mean, we're only there as monitors. We do not interfere. We do not play any significant role, as it were. Is it possible for political parties to conduct primaries or, you know, have activities that are going to lead up to elections, and especially primaries? I think I ought to be more specific there. And INEC is not present.
It won't be possible. It won't be possible because INEC have a role to play.
So it is extremely important for INEC to be there.
It's a what?
It's extremely important for INEC.
It's extremely impossible for INEC to be there because as far as I'm concerned, party primaries are critical and essential element of the democratization process. Mm-hmm. Do not forget that right now in Nigeria, we do not have position for independent candidature, as the case may be. So for you to seek to contest for electoral offices in Nigeria, you must belong to a political party. And to ensure that every member of the political party is given what I may say a fair chance of participating in the party primary, INEC, it's by the Constitution, by the Electoral Act, is empowered to monitor. And in monitoring, they have to be there physically. That is why at every local government level, you have an electoral officer. At the state offices, you have the resident electoral officers, and all the powers constitutionally vested on INEC is exercisable by the by the resident electoral commissioner, by the electoral officers in charge of the local government. So it is compulsory, it is mandatory, it is obviously necessary for INEC to be there to ensure that their guidelines have been duly complied with. That is why part of the document INEC submits after the primary is what they call the checklist, to ensure you tick a checklist, have they complied with ABCD. And then a formal report is issued indicating the place the primaries took place, the date, whether they are female aspirant. And I think the essence of finding out whether they are female aspirant is because of gender balance, or what one may say affirmative action, as the case may be.
The reason I asked you that question about INEC's role is because we have seen, you know, instances where controversy arises in primaries, for instance, that INEC has monitored. Maybe another candidate is claiming that he or she won, or maybe there is some confusion during the primaries, whereby parties still return candidates and INEC accepts those candidates. We have seen other contestants, I mean, other people who tried to, you know, contest during the primaries, saying that INEC was wrong in accepting those names. And INEC's defense is always, our role was just to monitor. We have absolutely no role in, you know, interfering with parties. So do you think that INEC has more than a role, you know, more than a monitoring role, so to speak? Can they reject candidates, for instance, if they see that the process is flawed?
Do I say that is a hard nut to crack? Because the responsibility to organize primaries and to feed candidates rests with the individual political parties. And INEC is more or less what I may say an official bystander, just to watch and not to interfere with the processes. They are there to monitor and ensure that there is a semblance or a fair compliance, because in the electoral process, it cannot be absolute. That is why we talk of free and fair, okay, not free and excellent, okay, free and fair. So at the end of an exercise that wears the toga of what appears to be fair and substantial compliance with INEC guideline for the conduct of party primaries. And do not forget also that each of these political parties usually develop their guidelines for the conduct of party primaries. INEC must always have a copy of it. And that is why in their checklist is there. Was there a guideline? Has it been complied with? So if INEC is convinced that in the process and based on the report of INEC representative at the venue, INEC accept the list submitted by the party.
Regardless of whether or not due process was followed. I mean, even if the party did not, say, follow its own guidelines, for instance, the guidelines handed to INEC, does INEC have the right to reject a candidate?
To my mind, one, if the party primary takes place within the time frame published by INEC, and the list of that primary issues from the party, and INEC is convinced that there's compliance, and in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, INEC accepts the list.
And if there is evidence to the contrary, what happens?
Okay, for instance, where you have duplicity of party primaries.
No, that's another instance.
Okay.
If, for instance, the party returns, let's look at, say, Rivers. I do recall, let us talk about Rivers in the past, not recently. I mean, of course, we're still going to come to Rivers, APC,
yes,
and see what's going on.
Yes.
But we recall during Rivers PDP, where the candidates went to court to contest and say, I was the one who won the primaries. Meanwhile, INEC had already, fielded another candidate. And they must have monitored that elections, don't you think? I mean, the primaries that produced the candidates that eventually that went through the elections. Can INEC say that due process was not followed and reject a candidate, perhaps to save, candidates the cost of going to court, for instance?
When you talk of due process, I'm glad that the word process qualifies the word due. Due process. Due. I mean, process is qualified by the word due. So it's actually a process. So what I'm saying is that if in the conduct of the party primary, INEC is satisfied.
You have said if it's satisfied.
Yes.
What if it is not satisfied? That's the question I'm asking. Can it say, we are not satisfied, we cannot accept your candidate?
Before now, the position of the law is that the party primary is essentially a party affair.
Yes.
And that whosoever the party named that the party submit in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, INEC ought to accept. That is my own position. In the absence of any evidence to the contrary, in the presence of manifest compliance with the party's guideline, and that the primary was conducted within the time frame as published by INEC, INEC is bound to accept.